I'm Alida Fish. Welcome to my studio. We're here in Arden, Delaware. I am a photographer, and we are in the main room that I use for my artwork. And this is actually the space that we will probably spend our entire visit. I do have two other areas that I work in. One is my office. It's a typical office. It's got a pretty high-end computer system with a couple of scanners and all the latest image manipulation programs and other programs that I need for working with my photographs. And it's also, of course, a place where, although artists don't often talk about this very much, it's the place where I have to spend a lot of time, just doing paperwork, PR work, all those things that, billing, all of the things that you have to do when you run a studio. My other space that I think of as an extension of my studio is the space that you walked through when you came in to the studio here, and that is right outside my studio door. There's a fish pond there. We have a beautiful garden, and Arden also is quite a green place. There are lots of walks here, and with my current work, that's all images of plants, I spend a lot of time looking for the things I want to photograph here, close to the house, and in this vicinity. One of the reasons that I think I am doing this talk isn't just to have you visit, but it's also to help support the Delaware Art Museum. I have work in their permanent collection. I'm very proud of that. And I'll show you a couple of proofs of that work. The work that's in the museum actually is darkroom work. So it's older. I no longer work with a darkroom. All of my work now is digital, although I think of it as a continuation of the way I've thought of my work all along, which is that it's hand-manipulated, handmade photography that I really concentrate on. I'm currently printing on oxidized aluminum. The last time I printed on paper was about 8 years ago. They were images on rice paper that had been coated with mica dust. I ran those prints, the mica-coated paper, through these old printers that I have in the studio. Then I tore them apart, reassembled them, drew on them, and ended up tacking them down with thread to a backing. So the processes that I work with really do involve a lot of handwork, and I think of my work as crossing between photography, printmaking, and painting. I dug out two proof prints of two of the pieces that the museum has in their collection. This series had to do with the story of Pygmalion, an artist who was so obsessed with his sculptural work that ultimately the sculpture became alive. And so these pieces are a combination of both sculpture and flesh. In other words, I had a nude model pose as the sculpture, and then through the magic of Photoshop, I blended their body into the sculpture. So the man on the left, when you look closely, you'll see he has a hairy chest, which clearly the original sculpture didn't have. And these are also tinted. They're selectively toned with a metallic chemical. It's called a chromoscodasic toning. But these proofs are different from the two pieces, the final pieces, because the toning and the print quality of these prints is radically different from one print to the other. I'll give you a quick view of my studio space here. I have a lot of storage. I have chemicals and various media that I use with my work. This is an old computer that happens to run a very early version of Photoshop that I love. And then over here I have extra printers. I have 3 of these old printers that have a flat bed and allow me to to feed metal, cloth, and just about anything I want through them. Over on this wall, I have backdrop papers that can be dropped down for shooting. They go all the way down to the floor, however far you want them to go. I have a viewing shelf here where I can look at work. Down below I have more storage. I do my own framing, so there is a lot of framing materials in the studio here. And these are my print drawers, again, for storage. They're really nice wooden storage. They hold my work and work by some other people that I collect, and then papers and so on, things that I need frequently. This is the table space that I work with. I need table space. Another old printer that I feed film through mostly at this point in time, but I can put other media through it as well. More storage for framing, my assistant's little bed there on the floor, and then the shelves that hold a lot of the things that are left over from when I worked in a dark room. I closed out my dark room. It's now a walk-in closet, very nice. But now I work primarily digitally. I would say only digitally. I have a few digital cameras. I work with Photoshop, and that's made life a lot easier, I would say, in many ways. And also, it requires fewer storage areas. Since we're in the midst of a pandemic, I do want to talk a little bit about how COVID-19 has changed my studio practice, as it has changed everybody's lives. Mine is a little different. In many ways, my life in the studio is pretty much the same. It's a solitary kind of activity that's carried on in here. However, when the pandemic hit in early March, I had been for several months working pretty furiously at getting new work together for a number of different venues. One being the APAD, the big photography show in New York City. My gallery in New York, Alan Klotz's gallery, was going to have a booth there, and he was going to have some of my work. And there are thousands of people who come to that exhibition, and a lot of work is sold there. And it's just an incredible focal point for the international photography world. So that, of course, was canceled. And that was a bit of a disappointment. Galleries that carried my work suddenly, and I had work for them ready, they're closed. So all of that went away. And that's happened to so many people. I'm actually quite fortunate in that I'm a retired professor, and I have a little more flexibility than many people have who find themselves in really desperate straits at this point in time. One of the positive things about the pandemic, however, has been that during this summer, I essentially took a sabbatical. I haven't been in the studio very much. Pretty much what I've been doing is spending time outside, working in the garden, taking trees down, transplanting things. I've had time to think about the things that I've been photographing, what I want to do in the future. I've been reading, I've been looking at a lot of images and work by other artists. So I don't feel terribly negative in that sense. I'm working more virtually now. I'm working on an exhibition for the fall. It's all virtual. In some ways that's easier. I don't have to frame everything, but there's a lot of time in front of a computer. And my remarks are written. They go with the images. I'm also working on a lecture for the fall. That too will be virtual, and I'll be interviewed at the end of it, and that will all be virtual. So I miss being in a room with people, and I'm sure you understand what I'm talking about. So I think one of the things I want to do with this visit is show you some of the pieces that I prepared to be shown this year, and that have in fact never been shown. And I can talk about each piece, and then we'll see where we are at that point. I'm going to show you just a couple of new pieces that have been produced within the last year, and really have not been shown anywhere, in part because, as I mentioned earlier, I don't have anywhere to show them physically, that is. The one on the right, frankly, I do not know how to identify it. Don't know the name of this plant, but I photographed it in Bermuda. The one on the left is, I photographed that one in Cuba. That one's called Mother-in-Law Plant, and it's actually the only one of this series that I've done in a monochromatic way. The plants themselves, these leaves, are essentially dark brown and white, so they transcribe very easily into this monochrome. These two pieces, the one on the right is a version of Pampas Grass that I did most recently. It's a glossy print, which I don't often work with glossy metal. It's a little less formal than the previous Pampas images that I've done. And one of the things I like about this one, I like the sloppiness of the process, but I also like the fact that when you look closely at it, there are little seeds flying around. They look like they're flying in the wind. The one on the left is called Bottle Brush, and that one I did for a friend of mine who happened to have a bottle brush bush in her yard. I want to show you a quick overview of how I make my prints. I start with a piece of aluminum like this. This one's been sanded. And then I take a piece of rusty metal like this, and I put it on the plate. And then I take this plate and the metal and I put it in a bath with some chemicals that oxidize it. And it takes a few hours to oxidize, or a day or two. I just check it and have a look, to see whether the colors are looking good. And when it's ready, it looks like the way I want it to look, I'll take it out of the bath, wash it, dry it, and I end up with a plate that looks something like this one. And then on this plate, I can transfer my photograph. So I'll show you how I produce this image here, which is this one. This one I like. It's a finished print, and I will show it at some point in time. But I take a transparency that's been printed on my big old printer here, and I cover this plate with a receptive sauce that will receive the ink. So the transparency, the photograph, looks like this. I place it down carefully on this coated plate, and it sits for a few minutes, and then I carefully peel off the acetate, and the ink is left embedded into this sauce that I put on the plate. And then when it dries, I go back in and I touch it up, and sometimes I add things. I add other media to the surface. But essentially that is the process. I wouldn't actually use this particular plate with this image because I don't care for how the oxidation interacts with the photograph. So this is a plate that I'll use for some other purpose. I thought I would show you how I present these pieces. I've tried a number of different presentations, and this one is the one I'm most satisfied with. The print actually is backed by a substrate so that it's lifted up off of the backdrop, and you get about a ½ inch space, and that casts a shadow, and it gives you a sense of the three-dimensionality of the piece, and that it's a rigid substrate. It isn't a paper print. You get a much better sense of the print as an object. On the left is a similar image, unframed. It's the one that I showed you how I did this process. These two prints I have never shown, and they are a little bit of a tangent from the way I normally work. When I'm out in the garden, out walking, looking to photograph, I pick things up and I bring them back, and I have boxes of dried, leaves and seeds and just various things that I find interesting. I particularly like the one on the right. I think it just really brings everything together in terms of the forms and the shapes. But they hark back to early botanical prints for study. But I just, whether I'll keep working with these subjects, I don't know. But for now, I'm kind of enjoying the change. Well, thank you for visiting today. I've enjoyed it. I want to thank my trusty technician, Steve Tanis, for giving time from his busy studio to come and man the cell phone and put together this whole video. And I want to thank my trusty studio assistant, Tina here, for her help. She was very helpful. And above all else, I want to thank the Delaware Art Museum for facilitating this visit. Thank you.